Yo, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So about 2 weeks ago, I made a video going over my New York Islanders and how 12 months ago, they were probably in the worst spot in the entire NHL when looking at the outlook for the next decade. And after a good draft, after good in-season trades, moving off Lou Lamoriello and, of course, objectively getting lucky in the draft lottery, they now actually have some optimism. I'm not going to say that they're in a top 10 spot for the next decade in the NHL, but they had a transformative last 12 months going from the bottom of the barrel to now actually having some optimism. So I thought it'd be a fun idea to do kind of the exact opposite, a team that this time last year was in such a good position, but after a tumultuous year, they are now not at the bottom, but have a lot of question marks going forward, and their window appears to be shrinking. So we are going to be looking at the New York Rangers in their disastrous last 12 months. Because yeah, almost exactly a year ago, the New York Rangers were coming off a season where they won the President's Trophy and took the eventual Cup champions to 6 games. You compare that to the 2023 season where they were third in the Metro Division and lost in kind of embarrassing fashion to the New Jersey Devils. Things were back on track for the team. In that 2024 season, Artemi Panarin had his best season as a New York Ranger, having 49 goals, increasing his career high by 18 and 120 points. Most years, he definitely would have been a Hart finalist, maybe even won the damn thing. The only problem is McDavid, Matthews, McKinnon, Kucherov all went nuclear, so he ended up finishing 5th. On top of that, his line mate Alexis Lafreniere, former first overall pick that had this star potential, finally looked like he was breaking out, having 28 goals, 29 assists for 57 points, and it was looking like he could eventually be an elite first liner. Maybe not that superstar franchise guy, but getting back on track to 80% of what we were expecting. Basically, everybody on the New York Rangers in that 2024 season had a fantastic season outside of like Ryan Lindgren and Capo Caco. So when looking at the team heading into the summer, if they got a legit top line right winger for Zibanejad and Kreider, there was no reason why they could potentially not make it back to the Eastern Conference and win the Eastern Conference Finals, considering Florida was about to lose Brandon Montour and Tarasenko. 2 weeks after being eliminated, they re-signed Capo Caco to a 1-year deal at $2.4 million, kind of a prove-it deal because he only had 19 points in 61 games in 2024 after really showing some life in 2023 with 18 goals, 22 assists, and 40 points. In terms of potentially opening up salary cap space, Chris Drury had 2 options: either somehow move off Barclay Goodrow's remaining 3 years at $3.6 million, or maybe moving off his captain Jacob Trouba, who had 2 years left at $8 million. I mean, naturally, I assume nobody was going to pick up Barclay Goodrow because he was a 4th liner making solid 3rd liner money till he was 35 years old. But then Chris Drury's former teammate on the Buffalo Sabres, Mike Grier in San Jose, picks him up on waivers and they somehow get off his contract scot-free. Like, you cannot convince me that he does not have some big kind of IOU from Chris Drury right now, considering the fact that like a week later, they traded for Jake Wallman and the Detroit Red Wings gave him a 2nd-round pick to take on Jake Wallman. He was horrendous for the San Jose Sharks this season at 5-on-5, had a 21% goals percentage, expected goals 38.1, and had a -7.4 relative expected goals, which is the worst on the team. So yeah, they now had some money to potentially land that top line right winger on top of maybe trading Jacob Trouba and opening up another $8 million. Apparently there was a Trouba deal in the works to potentially go back home to Detroit, but due to the fact that his wife was still pursuing her medical degree in New York City, he decided to apparently put the Detroit Red Wings on his no-trade list. None of this is actually confirmed, but obviously nothing materialized between Trouba and the Detroit Red Wings, and Chris Drury decided, okay, I'm not going to push this guy so hard, completely force him out, unlike he will later in this video. We're just going to roll with it. Then we go into the 2024 draft, and after the New York Rangers and Chris Drury got arguably the biggest steal in the 2023 draft with Gabe Perreault going 23rd overall, he goes the complete opposite direction and decides to take the total defensive defenseman EJ Emery at 30th overall. And in fairness, I did like EJ Emery a decent amount. I can't act like I also wasn't buying some of his hype. I had him 20th on my board, but there was clear massive concerns about his offense at the U.S. National Team Development Program, and then he just put up 1 point in 31 games at North Dakota. Again, I'm not saying that he has to be some offensive beast, but to play at the NHL level, you need to be somewhat competent transporting the puck and offer a little bit of offense. He was the only 1st-round pick to put up just 1 point in a freshman season, so not too encouraging. The rest of their draft was not too encouraging as well, as they took Raul Bullard in the 4th round, who had a decrease in points per game this year. Nathan Aspinall is a 6'7" winger who did improve, but still only 47 points in 62 games in the OHL. Enrico Gradig had 5 points in 40 games in the Swiss League, so probably no NHLers there. But hey, this is a win now team, and we're heading towards free agency to improve that top line with around $11 million in cap space. Granted, they did have Braden Schneider and Ryan Lingen as restricted free agents. Chris Drury's fix for that top line right wing position is Riley Smith. 1 year left at $3.75 million after the Pittsburgh Penguins retained $1.25 million, giving up a second and a fifth round pick. Smith was coming off just an okay season of 13 goals, 27 assists, 40 points. Like, he was by no means completely washed up, and he was pretty solid defensively, but this was not the guy that was going to unlock Zibanejad and Kreider at 5-on-5. And again, I need to emphasize this before we talk about the actual season. The Rangers had consistently been a brutal 5-on-5 team. In that 2024 season where they won the President's Trophy, they ranked 21st in expected goals percentage at 5-on-5. It was just their power play and penalty kill that ranked third in both regards, as well as great goaltending that got them that President's Trophy. As well as the fact that in 2022, they ranked 23rd in 5-on-5 expected goals percentage. In 2023, that was 22nd, and they got completely caved in against the Florida Panthers at 5-on-5. That's why they ended up getting kind of blown out towards the end of that series. So yeah, instead of making clear changes, the New York Rangers decided to just add a 40-point right winger that's 33 years old to overhaul their potential 5-on-5 problems. There was massive flaws with this approach. The rest of their money, they decided to re-sign Braden Schneider on a 2-year deal at $2.2 million, solid bottom pair right-handed defenseman, and gave Ryan Lindgren a 1-year deal at $4.5 after he had a brutal season and kind of got exposed as an Adam Fox merchant. Still, even with their 5-on-5 problems, they were expected, because the special teams were so good, because Shesterkin is such a good goaltender, they were expected to be a safe playoff team and maybe make some noise in the playoffs. I'm not acting like I had them out of the playoffs by any stretch. And I feel like people may have forgotten because what happens later in this video, but they started out pretty damn good, going 5-0-1 in their first 6 games. People thought, oh, the 2024 Rangers are back and maybe they're even better. And after that 7th game of the season, Chris Drury had seen enough from Alexis Lafreniere, who had 7 points in his first 7 games of the season. After last year having that 28 goals, 57 points, decided to lock him the hell up now at 7 years, $7.45 million, because if he keep this up, he was going to keep this up and then want 8 years, $9.5 million on July 1st. New York Ranger fans thought that they had their equivalent of the Jack Hughes 8x8, and he was going to grow into this and reach his potential of an 80, 90 point guy. And again, much like EJ Emery, I'm not going to act like I hated the Lafreniere extension in the moment. I thought that he was going to at least be that player that he was in prior seasons, but there were serious concerns that, oh, he played with heart level Artemi Panarin last year as well as Trocheck. Can he drive his own line? Is he more so of a passenger? We'll find out later in this video. The winning did continue, though, as on November 19th, after a nice win over the Vancouver Canucks, a potential future Stanley Cup matchup, considering how good those teams were last year, and at the start of this season, they were 12-4-1. Panarin was yet again playing like a Hart candidate, having 10 goals, 14 assists. Will Cooley had 14 points in 17 games. Lafreniere and Zibanejad had 14 goals. Chris Kreider had 9 goals, but 0 assists. Those assists were eventually going to come, everybody thought, and Shesterkin had a 9-11. Things were absolutely cooking. Then they have a 5-game losing streak, and shit just starts to hit the goddamn fan. The one guy that, despite them starting out so good, was playing kind of like turbo dog shit was Jacob Trouba, who had just 6 points in 24 games and was a -3, and his advanced stats were pretty horrible. So in the first week of December, Chris Drury had finally seen enough and said, buddy, you're waiving your no trade clause, or we're just going to throw you down to the AHL. We're not going to play you at all. Your time has come. On December 6th in the morning, it was announced that Trouba would miss that night's game due to roster management. And for a solid 4 hours, we had absolutely no clue what was going on with Trouba, whether or not he was being waived or a trade was already in place. And much like the Barclay Goodrow situation, we assumed that he was either going to get waived or the Rangers were going to be trading like a first-round pick alongside him to dump his contract. But that was not the case. Despite making $8 million playing like a $3 million defenseman, Pat Verbeek ended up giving the Rangers a 4th-round pick, as well as Urho Vankanainen, and the Rangers retained absolutely no money. So, I mean, in terms of pure asset value, this was fantastic for the New York Rangers getting off his cap hit, but in terms of the effects on the locker room, I think we can agree it was pretty damaging. And then, funny enough, after trading away their captain just a couple hours later, they extended Igor Shesterkin on an 8-year deal at $11.5 million. And again, he's fantastic in the playoffs, a career .928. But when you look at the relative other guys that were set to hit the unrestricted free agency market, especially Connor Hellebuck in Winnipeg, only taking 8.5, It was $3 million more than that kind of bunch, and he only had one truly elite regular season. It was a lot to give to a goaltender, even though I agree Shesterkin is a top 3 goaltender in the NHL. After the Trouba trade and Shesterkin win, they did rally to beat the Pittsburgh Penguins that night, but after it lost 4 out of their next 5 games and were 15-1-1 on December 17th, and now sat 3 points back of the Senators for the final wild card spot. In their 3-2 loss to the St. Louis Blues on December 15th, Kaapo Kakko was healthy scratch. And at the practice the next day, he kind of completely went off on the coaching staff, saying, "I haven't been on the ice too much when opponents score a goal. I have not been the worst guy, but that was me out of the lineup." When asked by Molly Walker, does he need to talk to the coaches before going back to see what they want from him, he said, "I'm not going to do that. They're going to say it if they have something to say, but I'm not going in there." And she said that he was as dejected as she's ever seen him. Another quote on whether or not he was surprised: "I was surprised. I know you got to do something as a coach when you're losing games, but I think it's easy to just pick on the young guy and boot him out. That's how I feel, to be honest." And then lastly, if he's ever felt singled out as a member of the New York Rangers, yeah, for sure. I can say the same thing all the time. The whole team is kind of playing bad, and I get you got to do something. I don't know. If I were the coach, I would do something also. I was surprised. It was me at that point. The next game, he was back in the lineup against the Nashville Predators, but only played 10 minutes and 14 seconds in a 2-0 loss to the god-awful Nashville Predators, and he only had 3 points in his last 13 games. His ice time was going down. It was best for both parties to split. The return that they got for Kaapo Kakko, Will Borgen, a 3rd-round pick and a 6th-round pick for a guy that they selected 2nd overall just 5.5 years ago. But hey, even though it had been a brutal 2 weeks, Kaapo and Trouba are now gone. They were both kind of playing like ass, if we're going to be honest. It's time for the New York Rangers to get back on track, get back to their winning ways, right? They won their first game without Kaapo Kakko, but then would go on to lose 4 straight and be 16-19-1, second to last in the Eastern Conference, only ahead of the Buffalo Sabres, who were like fresh off their 13-game losing streak. However, in January, they did show life. They went 8-1-3 to catapult themselves back in the playoff race, and we looked like we were having a great 5-team race between them, the Bruins, Jackets, Senators, and Canadiens for the final spots. And as a result of this good stretch, Will Borgen cashed in a 5-year deal at $4.1 million despite the small sample size, playing alongside Keandre Miller. He's 28 years old, though. This takes him until he's 33. I'm not a fan of that deal. I know he's been solid on New York, but you don't give third-pair guys that kind of long-term money. I'm not a fan of that deal. It seems like it kind of was reactionary to Kaapo Kakko completely popping off once he got to Seattle. At that point, he had 14 points in his first 17 games. Chris Drury could not risk letting Borgen walk to free agency. He wanted to lock him up, so at least he could point that he's going to have Borgen for the foreseeable future, even if Kaapo Kakko turns into a stud. Also, of course, at this time, the Vancouver Canucks, another team that won their division the prior season and now were battling for a wild card spot, was really going through it, especially within the locker room. There was serious beef between JT Miller and Elias Pettersson, and considering Miller was the 31-year-old and Pettersson just recently signed a huge contract, Miller was going to be the odd man out. JT Miller, of course, was a former New York Ranger, and considering how bad Zibanejad was at that point, 9 goals, 29 points, and a -25, with the 7th worst expected goals against per 60 in the NHL alongside former teammate Barclay Goodrow, they needed a legit number 1 center and kind of to push out Zibanejad to the wing. So on Friday, January 21st, a massive blockbuster went down as the Rangers got JT Miller, Eric Branstrom, Jackson Dorrington for Philip Hedl, Victor Mancini, and a top 13 protected 2025 first. Miller, while no longer the 37-goal, 103-point guy that he was the prior season on the PDO Canucks, still had 35 points in 40 games, was only making $8 million, and was 31 years old, so he fit right in with the New York Rangers' kind of old forward core. Giving up the first-round pick was a little bit crazy, considering the fact that they were 7 points back of a playoff spot, but it did have a top 13 protection where they would have had the option, if it fell within the top 13, to send it to Vancouver. But hey, they were going up against teams like Columbus, Ottawa, Montreal for that final spot. They just acquired JT Miller, only really for Philip Hedl. This team surely can beat out those guys and end up making the playoffs, right? And hey, they did go 6-3 over their next 9 games. The only problem is the other Eastern Conference wildcard teams were playing very good in their own right. They were still 4 points back of a playoff spot, leading to Chris Drury having some tough decisions to make leading up to the deadline. He ended up getting an offer that he really couldn't refuse for Ryan Lindgren, who was actively hurting the team at the time and did hurt Colorado come the playoffs, getting basically a second and a fourth round pick for him. And then at the actual deadline, a couple days later, he kind of didn't really pick a lane. He decided to sell, then buy, trading away Riley Smith for a third round pick for Vegas, and then using that third round pick to go get Carson Soucy, who was very good in 2024, but was pretty ass this season and still has another year at 3.25 and is 31 years old. But hey, they're still alive to make the playoffs. All they got to do is, again, beat the Jackets, Sens, Canadians. You can do this. These teams are not as experienced and have not had the success that you have had. After the deadline, it was a disaster, though. That Saturday game against the Ottawa Senators, they were up 3-1 with 10 minutes to go in the third period, ended up losing that game 4-3 against the Senators, who they were battling with. And then in that Sunday game against the Columbus Blue Jackets, it was tied 3-3 midway through the second period, and Columbus would score the next 4 goals. So with looking at it, they thought that they had a win locked up against the Ottawa Senators, only came away with 1 point against their 2 main competition for wildcard spots at the time. They lost their next game to the Winnipeg Jets, but then did win their next 2 against the Minnesota Wild and got some revenge on the Columbus Blue Jackets, but then lost 5 out of their next 6. The rest of the way, they went a completely mediocre 6-5-1, including 3 straight losses to 3 or more goals. Meanwhile, the Canadians, that inexperienced, scrappy bunch, went 7-1-2 in their final 10 games and ended up finishing 6 points ahead of the New York Rangers. Also, during those final couple of games, despite basically being out of the playoff race, they signed Gabe Perreault only to healthy scratch him, put him up in the press box a couple of times. When looking at JT Miller's impact, he did have 35 points in 32 games, so going forward, I think he can be a first-line center, as well as Zibanejad kicking out the wing and having 33 points in 32 games. But overall in the season, everybody basically outside of Will Cooley had a pretty big down year. Remember Alexis Lafreniere, after having 7 points in his first 7 games, primed for a big breakout? He had just 38 points in his final 75 games after signing that contract. Just okay middle sixer production despite playing with elite talent. Keandre Miller, who back in 2023 had 43 points and was looking like he was going to be the legit stud number 2 to Adam Fox, he had yet again a pretty mediocre offensive season, having 27 points while playing the most of his career, 21.57 a night. And while he was very good with Adam Fox, they actually had the highest expected goals percentage as a pair and a 61% actual goals percentage. When he wasn't playing with Fox, with Borgen, with Schneider, his numbers were kind of straight up ass. Chris Kreider, who started out with 9 goals and 0 assists in 17 games, the assists never really came after having 39 goals, 36 assists, 75 points last year, 22 goals, 8 assists, 30 points in 68 games. Panarin was still very good. Do not get me wrong. He is still an elite player, but going from 49 goals, 120 points to 37 goals, 52 assists, 89 points is not really ideal. As well as, of course, his main center, Vincent Trocheck, going from 77 points all the way down to 59. And at the end of the season exit interview media session, Calvin DeHaan basically said it's effed up how they treated him after he got traded in the Ryan Lindgren deal, which was not really good for PR. So let's kind of summarize what we just went over. The New York Rangers, after winning the President's Trophy, making Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals, but kind of being fugazi considering their 5-on-5 struggles, they decided to bring in Riley Smith with the money that they saved from Barclay Goodrow instead of being aggressive, moving off Jacob Trouba and bringing in a serious difference maker. And then actually in the season, it started off well. They went 5-0-1. They gave Lafreniere an absolute bag and he went invisible. They were 12-4-1, but after a 5-game losing streak, shit hit the fan. They ended up forcing their captain out of town. Although he wasn't playing good, that was a pretty brutal look. They gave Shesterkin an 8-year, $11.5 million deal that is going to be very, very hard to live up to, especially compared to other goalie contracts. Then they shipped out their former second overall pick for kind of like a number 5 defenseman that they decided to give 5 years till he's 33, 34 years old. They ended up swinging for the fences on JT Miller, giving up their first round pick this season, most likely at the deadline. Got a good deal for Lindgren, I won't lie, but then decided to basically trade Riley Smith for Carson Soucy, who has 1 year left at 3.25. Could not beat out the Senators or the Canadians for one of the wild card spots. And that was the Rangers season. So now the Rangers are in a pretty brutal spot this summer. They could keep their 12th overall selection because it is top 13 protected. But now instead of it going to Vancouver, going out of the conference, now the Pittsburgh Penguins have that pick because of the Marcus Pettersson deal. I personally would not risk going into next season with an unprotected pick going into Pittsburgh. And when looking at them money-wise, because of the Shesterkin and Lafreniere extensions, as well as bringing in JT Miller's $8 million cap hit, they only have $8.4 million to re-sign Keandre Miller and Will Cooley, leading to Keandre Miller basically being on the trade block at this point. Like, Keandre Miller has definitely not panned out since that 2023 breakout, but he is still the clear-cut second best defenseman on this team. And again, they don't really have the assets to potentially go swinging for a legit number 2. So as a result, they're cap crunched and could be rolling out like Braden Schneider as their second best defenseman next season. So now, because of this cap crunch, let's say that they bring back Miller and Cooley on both like 2-year deals that only combine for $8.4 million. They're going to be running back the exact same team that only went 15, 14, and 3 post Miller trade. And their forward core is old as shit. If you say that their top 4 forwards, let's say Lafreniere is better than Kreider, but even that's debatable. Those guys are all 31 through 34. They're not getting any younger. Yes, I do like the Mike Sullivan hiring, and I do think that they are going to be better next season. At the end of the day, they still have guys like Fox, Shesterkin, both top 5 players in their respective positions. But when looking at it, do we think that this team is going to be better than the Carolina Hurricanes, who have so much money just to add to their team? Washington, after what they did this season, the internal growth that they'll have, as well as a healthy Devils, I'm not sure they're going to get back in that top 3 of the Metro. And even the 2 wildcard teams, the Ottawa Senators and the Montreal Canadiens, although maybe not the strongest teams last year, they're only going to get better in terms of internal growth, and they do have some cap space to potentially improve the team. They are objectively an old and kind of shallow team unless Perreault, Othman come in and make an immediate impact, but defensively, that defense core is really, really bad at this point, and Igor Shesterkin is going to have to play 60, 65 games next season, considering even Jonathan Quick has kind of regressed to a decent degree. So yeah, man, I'm not acting like the New York Rangers are going to have another 86-point season next year, but it seems like after these last 12 months, the serious contention window has kind of closed. Maybe next year they could if Shesterkin again just puts up a 930, but that's what he's had to do every single year in the playoffs for them to have any single shot in a series. This team is just old and they don't really have what it takes at this point, especially considering their 5-on-5 problems, which I don't think Mike Sullivan is going to immediately turn them into some kind of top 10 5-on-5 team. And the thing is, it's not just about the team taking a massive step back right now the last 12 months. The future of this team has been massively impacted over the last 12 months. It starts, of course, with Lafreniere. You thought that he was going to eventually become an 80 to 90 point guy after last season. That is not the case. I'd be shocked if he's point per game, as well as Keandre Miller not taking steps to become that legit number 2 defenseman. Capo Caco got shipped out for a bunch of scraps. Will Cooley actually did take positive steps. I got to commend them with that. But Gabe Perreault took a step back in terms of his points per game this year at Boston College. I know that he no longer had Will Smith, but still was playing with James Higgins. The next generation of Rangers, where you thought that they were going to transition out of Panarin, Trocheck, Zibanejad, and have those young forwards, that's not looking very good. It very much seems like once Fox and Shesterkin start to regress, considering they're 27 and 29 years old, they're going to need a full reset button at this point, considering Lafreniere, Miller, Perreault might not be those elite guys to keep it going. They look like they're very much on a 4 to 5 year window before they have to probably rebuild. So yeah, Chris Drury, he should be fired if they don't safely make the playoffs next season or make it out of the first round. This team needs significant changes, and maybe you can come off next offseason when they have some more money. But these last 12 months have been brutal for the New York Rangers. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about this? What other video essays do you want to see?